Hi everyone and welcome back. So this is the second lecture in our series on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And last time I did an overview of the plot of the book. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the beat writers and postmodernism and how this book kind of fits into those two literary traditions. So let's get started. The Beat generation was kind of a counterculture movement that influenced and predated the hippies, and it ran from the late 1940s after World War II right up until about 1960. It was a term that applies to a group of American poets and novelists of the 50s and 60s who rebelled against American culture and values. They viewed the United States as conservative, imperialistic, constrictive. The atom bomb, the war in Vietnam, this picture is from later, but the war in Vietnam did start in this period. Ecological pollution were sources of concern that fueled their unease and disillusionment. And for this generation, it was kind of an age of anxiety. If you heard my other lecture about the American literary movements, I talked about postmodernism. So this is a movement that some people say is alongside postmodernism. Some people say is a type of postmodernism. However you kind of want to think of it, it came out during that same period after World War II with the anxieties of the war they just finished, the war that they're going into, that kind of thing. So here we have the beat writers at a cafe, and then all here kind of hanging out. William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, a few other names there that I can't quite make out. The Beat generation really, people point to it beginning in 1944. Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg were both students at Columbia University. They met Harvard graduate William Burroughs, and they kind of all met through mutual friends. Other leaders who came along a little bit later were Neil Cassidy and then Ken Kesey, whose book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, we're looking at. Because many of these writers knew each other, some literary critics have said that the Beats were more of a social circle than a fully realized literary movement. I would argue that many literary movements came out of a social circle. If you've been in this class or possibly a different class where I talk about the Transcendentalists, a lot of them lived very close to one another, many coming out of Concord. Emerson, Thoreau, Alcott, they all kind of lived quite near each other, moved in the same circles. We also have the lost generation of after World War I, where you have Hemingway and Dorothy Parker, and they used to even meet up at what was called the Algonquin Round Table, that they would have these discussions. So I think that I wouldn't say that it's not a fully realized movement. The writing that came out of the movement included On the Road by Jack Kerouac, The Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the poetry of Allen Ginsberg, and this really was culturally groundbreaking. I don't know that you can have the hippies of the 1960s and 70s without the Beats of the 1950s. Their literature really did influence that generation. Sorry. So this typical scene here of the 1950s America. The writers in this movement were really disillusioned and turned off by the prosperity and hypocrisy of post-World War II Americans. New war propaganda, material glut, and waste, a sense of powerlessness in relation to these large organizations, the feeling of being manipulated by advertising and publicity. This is the age of television, when television first came out, and advertising completely changed. You're watching programs for free, but then they are sponsored by ads. This was common with radio, but kind of picked up more with TV. But this idea of America as a place that, on one hand, didn't want to be like the Nazis or the communists, 1940s or 1950s and encouraged individualism, but at the same time, that sense of unease and restlessness led to this idea that conformity may be better for society, that we work together as a community, and that a lot of people did, in some ways, become complacent. They had just come through World War II, and now they had a sense of peace, and they just want to buy things and live in nice houses and raise their children, right? But the beat writers really saw this as being hypocritical. So they're questioning the validity of the American dream, and trespassing legal and moral boundaries. So some drugs involved, a lot of heavy drinking, in search of personal freedom and exuberant ways of living and being. The merry pranksters that Ken Kesey was a part of, trying to make art out of life. The term beat was coined by Kerouac for its punning reference to beaten down and beatified. Beaten down suggests exhaustion, being at the bottom of the world. Beatified has kind of a religious implication, like a beatific vision. In Christian theology, this means seeing God face to face, not imperfectly through just faith, but actually seeing God. So drug use is encouraged to help induce an altered state that would help people kind of reach an intensely psychological, almost religious experience. But they did, in many ways, feel beaten down by the world, and that kind of has a dual meaning. And we're going to look at a quote from Allen Ginsberg in a minute that shows kind of this duality of being beaten down and yet also in this exaltative state where they're trying to know more than other people, basically. Know more and be more and go beyond the boundaries of what can be known. The Beat Generation writers often expressed their revolt in works, so their work is loosely structured. A lot of times it's a mix of poetry and prose, employing slang and vulgar diction, graphic sexuality. We get that in the book One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest. We have a lot of, I know several people that the slang kind of sets them off, the conversational tone here. I just watched one critic on YouTube who's just a book reviewer, but she's like, I read Victorian literature and I can't read this book because it is so chatty. It's meant to be talked the way someone would talk. A lot of Jack Kerouac's work is stream of consciousness writing, so it kind of all flows out all at once, and many people find that a bit difficult to follow. But some of the writing influences are drunkenness and abandon, hallucinogenic drugs, sexual ecstasy, Buddhism, live jazz music, anything that increased the sensation of being heightened to life. Their goal is release from the confines of social and moral judgment, from conformist and materialistic society, from the conventions even of literature, to break free and to break out and to be different. So here we come to Ken Kesey. Kesey was born in 1935, grew up as the son of dairy farmers in Oregon. He attended the University of Oregon and then Stanford University, enrolling in a creative writing program after he suffered an injury from wrestling that kept him off the Olympic team. So he kind of turned from that toward his other passion, which was writing. And in the 1950s, he volunteered to partake in a series of drug tests that turned out to be part of MKUltra program. So this was a program run by the CIA to test LSD as a possible mind control drug, though Ken Kesey did not know that at the time. His exploits later with Neal Cassady and their merry pranksters, as I mentioned before, they're trying to create art out of life. You can read about that if you like in the electric Kool-Aid acid test. Some people find that kind of inspiring, and some people think that the pranks that they're doing are sort of just silly. So it's interesting how we look at things now in our current time. So here is Allen Ginsberg, talking about the differences between Jack Kerouac and Ken Kesey. Jack was very shy, sat down on the couch which was covered by American flags, but shyly. But more than that, like a very deep sorrow, realizing that all of these eager-beavered pranksters were going through another stage of dumb show, another stage of idealistic nonsense, another attempt to make themselves real, though they were all made of phantom stuff, and they hadn't realized it. And in the course of that, they were poisoning Cassidy with amphetamine as Jack was poisoning himself with alcohol. So Jack was down-mouthed, sad, reflective, unresponsive to all their enthusiasm, and actual forced electrical gaiety, visual gaiety. Kesey was like a very beautiful, musing angel on the scene because he was observant and trying to understand where Kerouac was. Some of the younger pranksters were mocking of Kerouac. What's the matter with him? Why isn't he jumping? Why isn't he enthusiastic? Why isn't he excited? Why isn't he ecstatic? Well, his ecstasy was in the realization that they were all dead right there on the scene. A really intriguing to me way of looking at life. That, again, this idea of the beatific and ecstatic, and also the beaten down, kind of all coming in at the same time. That Jack Kerouac is being reflective, unresponsive. He feels that this is dumb, this is a show, this is something that they're putting on. They're not really experiencing life. Ken Kesey kind of being in the middle of this, understanding the sense of being beaten down and yet wanting to be ecstatic and to be happy and to see the joy of life. Just both two sides of the same coin, trying to look at the world in different ways. And you can see the world through this lens that the Beats had and be very depressed that it is the way it is. Or you can see it through this lens and say, well, I'm not going to live that way, and I'm going to go to the beat of my own drummer, right? That I'm going to live a different way, and I'm going to be happy and enthusiastic about life. But they are really both seeing the world almost the same way. They're just having different reactions to it. So going back to this idea of MKUltra, in an interview for PBS, Kesey said that they originally believed the drug trials were to help people who were sick, and that's why they signed up for it. It was a little bit of extra money, and they were advertising in Stanford for students to come and participate. Ginsberg told him something else was going on, and kind of seemed to have some insight as to why these trials were going on, maybe had talked to people at the hospital, but or the college, rather. But Kesey said that he didn't find out till nearly 20 years later that the CIA had been trying to, quote, make people crazy rather than cure those who were mentally ill. So at the time he wrote the book, he really did not know still what he had fully been participating in. But after the trials were over, he worked in a mental health institution at night. He saw those who were being treated and those who were doing the treatment, and kind of these blurred lines between sanity and insanity. He started stealing drugs from the hospital, and he wrote this book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, at night, often while under the influence. I'm going to give you guys a clip of him actually talking about this, and how he had this vision of a Native American kind of breaking free. Again, having a Native American being like the Beats, seeing a different side of life and perhaps being beaten down by the establishment. There he is, a little bit younger. So the book in some way is focused on postmodern ideals, questioning the dominant way of thinking, questioning and challenging established conventions and institutions, becoming aware of the ways that institutions of power control or manipulate people, eliminating the idea of absolute truth, that no one person or institution holds a true vision or knows what the truth is. I think this is really starting even with the narration of Chief Bromden, that We're questioning truth right away. The characters don't know that he can hear and speak, but the reader also isn't sure what's real and what is part of his mental illness, part of his hallucinations. So, like the other beat writers, Kesey shows the virtue of breaking free from the confines of social and moral judgment, as well as the confines of traditional literature, because of the way in which this story is told. Also, like the beat writers, as I said, this story is a lot more structured than some of their other work, so it is easy to follow the plot, but the way that sexuality is described, the slang that is used, some of the more graphic scenes, the way that alcohol use is described, all of those types of things are part of that beat movement. And the idea that there's a character who is trying to be ecstatic while other people are really being beaten down around him. And so as a result of this, one of the largest, most prominent themes or ideas is the conflict in the book, which is man versus society. McMurphy is an anti-hero, as I mentioned previously, but he's also an idealized American in many other ways. He's charismatic, he's hyper-masculine. Like the Merry Pranksters, he is a nonconformist. He's caring about himself first, but he's really enthusiastic about life. He wants to watch the World Series, he wants to play games, and he wants to have fun. And he doesn't understand why no one else around him is not having fun. He doesn't understand why they seem so joyless and lifeless. His individualism and his merry, free spirit resists the combine. That's what this is a picture of here, a combine. They talk about this a lot. We're going to talk about it a little bit in my Talking Head video, but I wanted to introduce it here, just so you can see a picture of it. Mowing down the fields, right? Pulling people into machinery. So there's this machinery of society stripping people of their unique joy. Nurse Ratched isn't therefore just the villain. She really is the teeth of that combine. She's the person doing the chewing and the spitting out of people. She's a symbol of the establishment and stands in for institutions and organizations that would run us under and put us under their control. I'm going to talk about some of the other themes in my next lecture, but taking kind of all of this into account, I hope that you learned a little bit about the background and what I'd like you to look for while reading this book. The ways in which the reader is invited to question reality and truth, beginning with the chief's unreliable narration, and those blurred lines that Kesey saw while he was working in the mental institution. What are the lines between sanity and insanity? Who is doing the controlling and who is being the controlled? The ways in which McMurphy challenges the establishment. How are those challenges depicted as acts of heroism? This is really important to the beat writers as well as other postmodern authors. Challenging the establishment is seen as a heroic act. The ways in which the reader is invited to consider and question Nurse Ratched's dominant ways of thinking. So the World Series is a good example. She says, well, now, we had a lot of conversations about how the TV was used, and some people wanted it on for the nightly news, and of course we can only have it on for so many hours a day. So if we don't have it on, then your whole schedule is going to be changed. That is a pretty rational explanation. They've voted on this previously, right? But we're not really looking at her point of view as valid. So why is she bringing things like that up? How is she manipulating people? How does she think that these men need order and control, and how is she trying to run this ward? The struggles against this types of manipulation. First, we have psychological manipulation. We have really what would I guess be called emotional or psychological abuse. Then we have her using medicine to control and manipulate. So when people are not doing what she wants them to do. They're given various medications, and then later on, ECT, electric convulsive therapy, later also known as electric shock therapy, and also use of force. So as a last resort, forcefully, physically controlling people through force. The importance of individuality and free thinking. First, for self-serving purposes, and then later for the greater good. So how does it help these men to start thinking freely and to start breaking free from this manipulation, from this combine, from this machine of society? How is he helping them to be more joyful and less beaten down, to see the ecstasy of life rather than the depressing side? Okay, so that is it for today. I look forward to your thoughts on this book. It's very interesting. I think it has an important place in American literature. You know, even what I've talked about, what was going on at the time and historically. And in the next lecture, I'm going to talk about some of the other aspects of the novel and some of the other themes. So look for that. Thanks.